So it's lesson 9 today, and we started class just by doing a little brainstorming session around web application security. So if you are completing the lesson asynchronously, still like you to participate in the activity. You have until next Monday at 5 o'clock to do it. So you use the link on D2L, and jump you over to the Miro board, and on the board, I've just asked everybody to add a sticky note telling me what do you think about, what comes to mind when you think about web application security. Make sure you add your name to it, and for your contribution, this counts towards your in-class activity grade. So whoever mentioned this blue one, preventing hackers from stealing info, make sure you add your name to the note so I can give you credit for your contribution. So what are we doing today? Let's have a look. What's going on over the next several weeks? So we're going to break authentication down over 2 lessons. It's quite a lot to handle, to do, and implement properly in one lesson. I think it would be too rushed. So we're actually going to distribute some of the work over the next couple of classes, and that'll give us time to kind of delve into things at a little more reasonable pace. So if we just look at what we want to do today, I'm going to give you assignment 2. I'm going to go over that in a minute. And then we're going to examine some security concepts. So for the web, we're going to talk about sessions and cookies. We're going to talk about hashing and encryption. And then we want to start to implement authentication in our LAMP food project. So at least for today, we want to be able to implement user registration and login. And then we can do some more with this probably into the next week's class. We can then, once we can create users, then we can start to control access to different areas and functionality within our application. So I want to go over assignment 2. So again, I've had to make a little bit of revision to the syllabus, and the reason was originally the assignment was in 3 parts. I've broken it down into 2 parts. I've also pushed it back a little bit to give you a little bit of extra time, because originally the first part of assignment 2 was going to be due next week. So here we are in week 9. So the assignment is due in 2 parts. You have 2 weeks for part 1 and 2 weeks for part 2. And I'm also providing you with a couple of different options as to what you can do in the assignment. There's kind of a simpler version and a more complicated version, and you're free to choose whichever version of the assignment you want. The more complex version is actually worth more marks than the simpler version. So it's going to be up to you, and I'm going to go over both versions of the assignment now. Okay, so you've got 2 weeks to do part 1 and then an additional 2 weeks to do part 2. So let's look at the 2 versions of the assignment. Here's version 1. So version 1 of the assignment, your maximum grade is 80%. So whatever grades you get, I multiply them by 0.8. So you get 80%. That's the maximum, because option A, it's the easier version of the assignment. Okay. So if you're finding that PHP and MySQL is a real struggle for you, then option A is probably the right approach. Or if you're really crunched for time and you're happy with a maximum grade of 80, then do assignment 2, option A. In this option, you're basically extending the work you did in assignment 1. So you're starting with the 3 pages you built for assignment 1, and you're going to add additional functionality into that. So part 1 is due in 2 weeks on Monday at 5 o'clock. You'll give me your private GitHub repository link, and I want to see that you've done at least 4 commits spread over at least 2 dates. So you can actually reuse the same repository that you used for assignment 1. You don't need to create a new one. You'll also submit your live link on the AWS server, and make sure you've got a README file that describes the application and also includes the link to the live site. And for part 2, again, you're just going to do the same thing. Resubmit the same links and make sure you've done at least 4 additional commits over 2 more days. And you should be using Git commands rather than direct upload so that you have good descriptions in each commit. You have to do all your own work. You cannot take work off the internet or do the project with a classmate. Okay? Anything I've put on GitHub you can reference, but it's not for you to download, change, and give back to me. Okay? And just like before, your submissions are subject to a review. If there's anything that I think we need to discuss, I'll ask you to set up a private meeting and we'll discuss it. And that's partly to verify that you understand any of the work you've submitted. And you cannot modify your repository at all after the end date on April 12th. So if you're choosing option A, you're going to take what you built in assignment 1. You're going to build a separate homepage that describes your site, much like we've done for our Lamp Food project. You're going to create a shared header that includes navigation links so users can navigate between the different pages of your site. On the page that displays all your data, you're going to add a link so that you can create a new record. And you're also going to make add, edit, and delete links. So, because right now from assignment 1, people could only see the data, but they had no ability to edit or delete it. So you're going to add, edit, and delete functionality, and delete should also have a confirmation before users delete. So you're going to implement the ability to update and delete, and you're also going to implement error handling. So 404 error handling with your htaccess file like we did last week in class, and then a general error page with try-catch blocks. So any code that interacts with the database, if an error is thrown, users should get redirected to your error page. So that's for part 1. You already have learned, we've already covered how to do all this stuff, and you have 2 weeks to do it, which is lots of time. In the second part of the assignment, you're going to implement authentication, which we're going to start working on this week and finish up next week. So you'll need to build functional register login and logout pages. You're going to modify your header. So when users are anonymous, the header shows the links to register and to log in. As soon as somebody logs in, the register and login links disappear and their username and logout appears instead. And again, we're going to implement this in class either this week or next week. You're then going to make sure that the pages and links for creating, editing, and deleting are only accessible to users who have logged in. So an anonymous user can see the data, but they can't make any changes to it. You're also going to add the ability to upload an image when adding or editing a record. We're going to cover that in 2 weeks, how to upload files with PHP. And when we're editing, it should display any image that's already been there. You're going to implement your own CSS. You can use Bootstrap, you can do your own, or you can use a theme or CSS template you find online. If you find it online, make sure you reference it in your README file. If you do use Bootstrap, you can't just style your application exactly the same way as our Lamp Food. It should look different. If it looks exactly the same, you won't get marks for the CSS. And then you'll deploy to AWS and GitHub, same way, make sure I'm invited. So part 1 is worth 18 marks, part 2 is worth 16, but again, these get scaled down to 80% because this assignment is a fair bit easier than the other option. So here's the marks for part 1, here's the marks for part 2. Before we look at, and I should mention also, up to two bonus marks for implementing additional PHP functionality. And you would want to list that in your README file so I know what it is and where to look. Questions? Okay, Megan, what would be an example of something extra? Let's say something like adding reCAPTCHA to your register page would be would be extra. There are no, Chris, good question. There are no part marks. The functionality has to be working. So if you're going to do something extra in order to get the marks, the feature actually has to work. Good question, Bree. No, it's 80% and then up to 2 additional bonus on top of that. How will we tell what student did which assignment? You mean, Shazil, how will you indicate to me whether you're choosing option A or option B? Well, I'll be able to tell as soon as I look at your site. Because you'll see that that assignment B, it's a very different project. So the purpose and structure of it will look quite different from this one. So you don't have to indicate to me, it'll be quite clear which one you've picked, so you don't have to worry about that. But fair question. Are there any other questions about option A? Okay, so let's have a look at option B. Option B, so your max grade here is 100% plus up to 2 bonus marks. So same submission requirement. So the dates are the same. What you submit to me is the same. Your GitHub and AWS links, same number of commits required. So all this is the same between both versions. Same rules apply around doing your own work and not sharing code. So for option B, you're making a content management site. So you're kind of your own custom version of a tool like WordPress. And what content management systems do is they allow users to manage their own website content, even without knowing how to code. So it's very popular when we're building websites for clients to use a content management system, either an existing one like WordPress or Squarespace, or a custom one that we build. And that way we can train our customers on how to use the site, and whenever they want to update the content, they don't need to pay us to make updates. We're giving them a private area to update their own content. So I've given kind of a video walkthrough of a sample, but I will show you one, a content management system built by a past student, to give you an idea of what this looks like. I'll go through that in a minute. So for part one, so content management site, there's really two different interfaces. There's the administrative control panel, and then there's the public website. So part one is building the administrative control panel. So there needs to be the ability to register and log in to the admin panel. We need to be able to list, edit, and delete any of the users, as well as the ability to create, add, edit, and delete web pages from the database. Keep in mind, and this is important, each page is not a physical page. It's just a record in your database. This is the way content management systems work. The content is virtual. And everything in the control panel should be password protected. Only the owner of the site or the manager of the site would have access to this. So this is what you have to build for part one. In part two, you're going to add an ability for an administrator to upload a logo, which should appear in the header of the website. And then you're going to build the public-facing site, which has a shared header. And the shared header lists all the page names as links that are in the database. So every time we add a new page, that page name automatically gets added as a link to the navigation bar. And then you have this dynamic index page that takes an ID parameter and loads the correct page from the database. So I've given you examples here. So you'll notice I've got pages called home, about, services, and contact. They all go to the same PHP page, but each one has a different ID parameter. And then you'll implement CSS and error handling in part 2 if you're doing option B. If you're doing option A, the error handling is part of part 1. So again, worth 18 and 16 marks, but the breakdown, it works differently because the requirements are different here. And again, up to 2 bonus marks for working functionality. So I'll show you an example of a previous content management system done by a student. From last year. I think I have a link in the repository. Yes. So Rebecca's in the web program. She's in semester 4 now. She'll be graduating next month. So here's the public facing site. And notice when I click on any link, it takes me to index.php, but it passes in an ID number. When I click a different link, it still takes me to index, but I'm getting a different ID. So this is the public facing end. Here's the admin panel. So in here, I can, if I want to create a new page, I can add a title and I can add content and save it. And now if I look at the public site, now immediately I have a new link that has my page title. And when I click it, I get my content, my title and content. If I go back to my control panel, I can edit the content. When I refresh it, my content shows up. Correct, Mason. So it's really like 2 sides to a site. There's a private admin site and there's a public site. And the private admin site is used to control the content on the public site. If I go ahead and delete this page, I get a confirmation. And now when I come back to the public page, now my link is gone. So I'm not creating new physical pages. I'm just creating new content records in the database. So everything in the navigation is queried from the same query that populates my list of pages. So this is how content management systems like WordPress or Joomla or Squarespace work. So the idea is someone can manage the content of their website without knowing how to code. They can create a page, change the content, or delete the page, and it changes the public-facing side of the website. So it is a little more complex, which is why it's worth more. So Shazil, you can probably see, coming back to your question, how will I know? It's a very different kind of site. So it should be clear when I load your site, whether you're just continuing your assignment 1 or whether you've chosen to build a content management system. So does anybody have any questions about the content management system? I've done my own little version and I've included a link. I did a little YouTube walkthrough, but it's much the same as the sample from Rebecca that I just showed you. This was my own version. I built it a couple of years ago. I used to have everybody do the content management system, but I've decided that offering students a choice, I think was a better idea. You're adults, you can choose, but I don't think giving them the same grading is fair because the option B, it's more work and it's more complex. So last call for questions before we move into our authentication lesson part 1 for today. Yes, Chris, that's right. It is only one website, but there's basically, there's basically 2 parts to it, right? There's the administrative end, and then there's the public website that anonymous users see. So the idea is you're mimicking. We want to have a look at a commercial content management system. So WordPress is the world's most popular content management system. It's written in PHP. So if I log in to the admin panel, I can see in here, so here's all my content. So I can create new pages or modify content in here. So this is the admin panel. And then the public facing site, it's the same website. So here's the public facing website. But it's controlled by the back-end admin panel, but it's still the same website. There's just two sections to it. Yeah, Wix is another example. Wix really just is a content management site. So yeah, it's possible. So that is part of what you're doing. So you'll have different administrators. So the idea is anybody can register in your site and they would be an administrator. But it's still just one website. So, that's really, Chris, if you've used Wix, that's really, you're basically building your own Wix. Mini version of Wix with PHP and MySQL. That's the goal. So yes, you can have multiple editors. That's not uncommon, right? Because maybe if we're going to give the website to a client, we're going to keep editing access so we can make changes if they need us to. But we also want to let our clients, we want to give them an administrative account so that they could also edit it. Yeah, that's right, Mason. Basically, each page, there's a pages table in the database, and each page has a page ID, a page title, and a page content property. So there aren't physical pages called about.php, fridayevents.php. These are just records in an SQL table. That's exactly the idea. So the content lives in the database rather than in individual files. So the individual files, they're just virtual. Right? It's the same URL, and changing the ID just loads different content onto the page. So it looks like different pages, but we're really just selecting a different record in the database as we navigate through the site. And this is the way most websites are built nowadays. Sorry, Megan, how is there lists then? Maybe Megan, you could just clarify your question. You can use your mic if that's easier. Oh, because this is the content on this page. So you could actually add HTML content. So if I embed HTML, right, it's saving those HTML tags into the database as part of the content. That would actually be something you could implement for bonus, is there are toolbars. So for example, on a CMS like WordPress, right, when I go to edit a page, I actually have the ability to format my content. So I can add things like bold, italics. I can make it into a list. So there are some third-party libraries you could add in. That would be worth bonus marks, where you could add formatting ability here. So Ivan, you asked, would it require if else? No, it doesn't require if else. It requires you to use the ID parameter in the URL to query the database and fetch the content that matches that ID. So you wouldn't want to use if else, because in theory, there's no limit to how many pages you could have. You could have 1 million pages in here. So you're just going to run a query to fetch this record based on the ID, and then you're displaying the content. In much the same way that our edit page works in our Lamp Food site. We click on a grocery item, it loads the same page, but the form pre-fills with different content based on our ID. So same idea here, if that helps, Ivan. So I'll encourage you to get started on part 1 so that you have time to send me an email or book an office hours appointment if you need any help. Don't leave it to the last minute, because then it's too late to get help when you need it. Okay, I am going to connect to the VPN and get our site running. So I'll open up XAMPP. Notice when I log out, I get register and log in. So we're going to implement this. So I'm going to open up my Lamp Food site we've been working on. I think our AWS server might be hibernating. Let's see. Okay, well, there's our error handling, so that's good. Yeah, I can go to the home page. For some reason, our AWS stack seems to sleep. Seems to be a common thread. So I may have to ask our computer studies technicians to wake it back up for us. Try yours out. I imagine you can't connect either. Yeah, this should be connecting right away. Nothing's working. Always fun. Okay, that's all right. We can get started on this. I'm going to pause my recording for a second. So, and the server just, I don't think it needs to be rebooted, but I think it sleeps somehow. So we'll get it back. And I'll open up my lamp food project. May as well get that open because we're going to obviously need to make some changes. So what we want to do, we have the ability, normally, not right now, normally the ability to view our grocery list as well as to add, edit, and delete items. So everything is public. So if I push this up to AWS, anybody that finds our website, they could delete everything, they could add whatever they want, they could make any changes to it. So we want to change that so that anybody could see our grocery list, but in order to make any changes to it, to add, to edit, or delete, they will have to first have an account, and second, they're going to have to log in. So what are the things we're going to need to do in order to make this happen? Let's kind of make a list of all the things we're going to need to do in order to add. Okay. Normally, Megan, I would love to do email verification because we're on the AWS server and we have limited access to, you're talking about sending confirmation emails? Do you mean? Okay. We won't be able to send a confirmation email, but normally that is a great idea. Ah, okay. So like the format of the email at least? Okay, yep. Yep, we'll want to do that. What else will we do? Okay. That's right, Chris. So we're going to add registered users to the database. What will we need to do in the database to make that happen? In order for us to be able to add registered users to the database, we're going to have to do something with the database. What's that? Right. Thanks, Chris. So we're going to have to do that first, right? Create a new users table in the DB. Before we can register users, we got to create the table so there's somewhere to put them. Okay, Megan, we're going to encrypt the data. Okay. We don't necessarily need to encrypt everything, but what specifically do we need to encrypt? Probably one thing. Right. And we'll come back, we'll talk about encryption again. Okay, so we'll need a users table. We'll need a way to register users in the database. We'll need to make sure we encrypt the passwords. When we're registering, we'll need to make sure we get proper emails. Okay, yep, we'll need to do all those things. What else will we need to do? So once we can sign users up, okay, yep, so we'll want to validate password format. Yep, great suggestion. So that can be part of our user registration, right? Before we sign them up, we'll want to make sure, I guess if I'm moving these in order, that should come first, right? Validate email, password, encrypt them, add them to the database. We'll maybe create the database table first. So that'll allow us to get, Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll make sure that passwords are a minimum of 8 characters, that they have at least one uppercase, one lowercase, and one digit. We'll maybe leave it at that for our purposes. Could also check for special characters. So this will allow us to register users. And what about controlling access? I know we can't see the grocery list right now, but then we want to control access so only authenticated users could make any changes to the grocery list. So what things are we going to need? What elements are we going to need for that to happen? Guys done a great job outlining some of the things we need, but there's some additional components too. What else should we do to secure that data? Okay, yep. So we'll need logic for create, edit, delete links, right? To show or hide. Yep. Okay. It's a good answer. One other obvious thing we need kind of happens between the registration and this logic. Let's keep checking. What do we need to sign users in? Thanks, Chris. Right, and Megan, we're going to need a login page, login, and validation pages. So a form where the user enters their credentials, and then a page it posts to that will check those credentials and see whether that user with those credentials exists in our users table. And then we need logic for the links, and we need logic for our details, save, and delete pages. So not only do we want to hide the links, but if someone tries to access one of those pages directly, we need some logic on the top that checks, is this user authenticated or anonymous? So we're going to need to do all of these things. And then eventually we're going to want to modify, we'll need a log out page so a user can sign out. And we'll need logic to toggle links in the header. So we've got quite a lot of stuff to do today, and that's why we're going to kind of do this over a couple of classes. We won't get it all done today, and that's all right. Okay. It's 2:49 by my count. So let's take a pause here until 3 o'clock. And when we come back, we're going to start on this stuff. Hopefully we'll have access to the server. If not, there's still some stuff that we can do while we're waiting for that to happen. So let's take a break, go stretch your legs. We will resume at 3 o'clock.